السلام عليكم الإخوان أخوات، هيهات انتم هيهات. كيم جونغ أونغ زعيم كوريا الشمالية كيدعم القضية الفلسطينية وكيشوف ناس الصهاينة محتلين. شوفوا الفيديو.
زعيم كوريا الشمالية كيم جونغ أون دعمه وتأييده للفلسطينيين في ظل عملية طوفان الأقصى. وقال كيم إن فلسطين قضية إنسانية لا تخص العرب والمسلمين وحسب، وإنما هي قضية مرتبطة بمسألة حرية. وينطلق الدعم الكوري الشمالي للقضية الفلسطينية من أن الكيان الصهيوني يمثل موقعا متقدما للغرب الذي يحاول فرض إملاءاته على الشعوب والسيطرة على مقدراتها. كما ينطلق هذا الموقف من حقيقة أن الكيان الصهيوني هو قوة الاحتلال، وأهمية دعم الشعب الفلسطيني لانتزاع الاستقلال.
سبحان الله، هي الخرياشة والمطبعين. كيم جونغ أونغ الدكتاتور الذي لا يرحم قال لك سيدي ان فلسطين مظلومة وان الصهاينة ظالمين. هتقول لي ضد في امريكا. المهم قال لك سيدي قضية فلسطين ماشي قضية ديال الدولة ولا كذا، لا أمة، لا قضية ديال العالم، وأن الصهاينة معدين على الناس هذو. فاختار أنه يكون في صف المسلمين. سبحان الله سبحان الله. ما عليناش، اليوم جينا نتكلموا على حسين خر اللي هو واحد الشخص فلسطيني الآن متواجد في بريطانيا، هو السفير الفلسطيني حسام زملط. حسام زملط هذا أكثر من 48 ساعة هو كيتقاتل، يحارب ويحارب. يعني اش غادي نقول لكم؟ تبهديله ما بعد تبهديله. السيد اللي استضافته القناه ديال CNN، استضافت واحد السيده اللي هي مذيعه، واحده من اشهر المذيعات الامريكيات اولا في العالم، CNN، سميتها كريستيان امانابور. هاد السيده جابته كيما بزاف القنوات ديال هاد الناس هادو اللي كيدعموا الصهاينه، باش كيبغوا ديما يقول لي كيف ترد، ما هو الادانه، كيف تدينون حركه حماس اللي دارت في اسرائيل. نفس السؤال كيتكرر. فهاد السيد سبحان الله العظيم يعني قلب على الطبله وبين له الحقائق، جبد له التاريخ، جبد له هنا، جبد له سالم مع هذه. طاح ثاني في بريطانيا صدفاته ونفس السؤال، هل تدينون ما فعلت حماس في اسرائيل؟ الجواب ديالو يكون من غير التاريخ، انه يقول له علاش ملي كيتوقع هاد الكوارث الكحله ديال اسرائيل ما كتجيبونيش انا هنايا، كتجيبوني ملي كتوقع شي حاجه ديالنا حنايا. علاش ملي كيجي شي اسرائيلي ولا شي مسؤول كبير من الصهاينه وكتجلس علاش ما كتطرحش هاد الاسئله؟ قال ليه كفى، انا ما نقول والو، غنخليكم مع الفيديو تشوفوهم ورجعوا دابا. لايكات وبارطاج.
What is more tragic or equally tragic is the blindness and the deafness of the world and the international community for so many years, of the warnings we have been saying that this was coming. Israel knew that this was coming their way. We, the National Movement of Palestine, the PLO, have found a different path 30 years ago. We have committed to what the world asked us: recognize Israel, commit to negotiations and non-violence, and to international legitimacy and resolution. Israel was expected to do one thing only: roll back its occupation, stop its colonial settlement expansion. Not one day it did so, killing the prospects of a two-state solution. And the world was expected to do one thing, Christian: uphold international law equally on everybody, on Ukraine, on Palestine. And the world fails to do that.
So now
no accountability. Now, every single political avenue is blocked. Every single legal avenue for us is blocked, like the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. You've heard what the US said, or the UK said.
But I want to know what happens now. What happens now?
There's
a war that Israel has declared after Palestinian militants, who I don't think you're friends. Hamas is not a supporter of the Palestinian Authority. There's a war. And as you say, there's going to be a massive escalation.
There is a war. You see, we're having this conversation because Israelis have seen what they have seen today. But my people see this every day. Every single day. Palestinians are targeted, killed, arrested, surrounded, their land is confiscated, their holy places are desecrated. Not only Muslims but Christians. You have been following what is happening in the Al-Aqsa Mosque and in our Christian churches, the spitting on Christian worshippers. Our people have been seeing apartheid being enforced on them over the last years, and the land is being taken, and the hope for a political solution that will fulfill their rights dissipating. And therefore, this is what we need to discuss.
Fine. Yeah, I know. But I mean, as you know, neither the Israeli political spectrum, nor the United States, nor anybody. It's like the Palestinian issue doesn't exist anymore. The two-state solution the diplomacy is on deep freeze. Can I first ask you, though, before we get to there, what triggered this attack? It's on a certain date, it's 50 years to the date just about. Before, 50 years ago it was October 6th, Yom Kippur. Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel. What do you think triggered this? And it was a very sophisticated Hamas attack.
I don't know. I really, really don't know. What I know is that it was a matter of when, not if. We've been shouting every day, don't leave a vacuum. Don't unheed what we are saying. Pay attention. Don't underestimate people's desire for freedom, for ending the bondage and captivity. Pay attention to the destruction that Israel is doing. Make sure that these supremacists in the Israeli government are not going to turn the whole thing upside down. Therefore, this is not about timing and all that. This is about the fact that we discuss everything except the core thing, the fundamental issue, the root causes. And we've been doing this for 75 years. One sentence. You know that 70% of the population in Gaza, the Palestinians, are refugees since the Nakba of 1948. You know that they have been under besiegement since 2007, the biggest open-air prison. This is what leads to events that you want to discuss.
So here's the thing. Obviously, the Israelis will say, this is what happens when we evacuate, for instance, withdraw from Gaza, which they have done. And as you're right, it is sealed and it is a very heavily guarded situation. But what now happens? So, for instance, I was speaking to the former Israeli ambassador to the US, Michael Oren, and he said, even you, Palestinian Authority, all of you guys who are in the West Bank, you're under threat from Hamas, and that you're only, he said, Mustafa and Mahmoud Abbas are only alive because Israel keeps them alive, that you're under such threat from your own people. What would you answer to that?
Nonsense. Absolutely nonsense. And Israeli lies all the time. What our people in Gaza are subjected to are the same in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and our refugees and diaspora. We are united by our suffering, and we are united by our goal, which is ending this occupation, ending this illegality. We have our political differences, of course, but we make no mistake that the one thing that we need to rid ourselves with is the Israeli military occupation, is the colonization, is the system of racial domination that has been imposed on us. We make no mistake of that. So this is not a Palestinian internal affair. This is the failure of every international actor to pay attention, of every international actor. You see, instead of learning the lessons, what I heard today from many international actors, including from the US and the UK, is doubling down on the very same mistakes and failure.
What is the option
that has led us to where we are?
What is the option right now? What happens? Israel doesn't respond to Hamas?
The alternative is statesmanship, is courage, the equal application of international law. We are not lesser of human beings. We are not the children of a lesser God. We are equal as all nations. It's been 75 years of oppression, of wholesale destruction. You've seen what happens in Gaza. Wait until tomorrow and see the thousands who will lose their lives and their livelihoods. Enough is enough. The only solution is respect people's legitimate birthright of self-determination, the right to return to their properties, the right to establish a state of their own, and stop dodging this. Stop finding, detours around it. There is no such a thing as detour. Peace can only be struck with us, the Palestinians, not with anyone else. Because Israel is in odds with us, because Israel has taken our land, because Israel is subjecting us and oppressing us, not anybody else. And bravery from the international community requires the equal application of international law. Israel, as an occupying power, has a full responsibility to protect the civilians under its own occupation, right? This is international law. Israel has the full responsibility to make sure no civilian is harmed. It's been doing the opposite for 75 years. You've just shown on your own program.
Do you worry that statement that you're making is completely compromised when Palestinian militants, terrorists, bomb Israeli civilians, kill them, capture them, hold them hostage?
No.
How do you keep the moral high ground in that case?
We keep the moral high ground by sticking to international law, by reverting to international judicial system, by seeking the ruling of the International Criminal Court. Let international judges come to Palestine, the occupied Palestinian territory, and rule, and we will accept the ruling. If we commit any mistakes or crimes, we will accept it. But everybody knows it's Israel that has been violating every provision of international law and our common human decency.
Do you see, final question, is there any mediator, the US or anybody right now, who could de-escalate this?
The US is completely disqualified. I've been following what is coming from Washington. Washington considers Israel to be a domestic issue, not a foreign policy issue, and Washington is playing political footballing with this, and regrettably, we have been at the receiving end. The solution is the world, the international community. The US should be on the table, but so is Europe, so is the rest of the world, so is China. The world must come together to end this conflict, as it did with all other conflicts. We are not an exception.
Who sums on that? Palestinian, the head of the Palestinian mission here, thank you for that perspective.
Do you support what Hamas launched on Saturday morning?
Well, this is not the right question, Louis. Really, the right
It's
question.
an important question.
No, it is not an important question because
whether you support their action or not is an important question.
No. It is not an important question. Hamas is a group, is a militant group. You're talking with the Palestinian representative. Our position is very well known and clear.
And what is that? Do you support Hamas's actions?
And then you cannot equate. This is not about support or not support. I am here to represent my people, the Palestinian people, what they are going through. I'm not here to condemn anybody. And if anybody that needs to be condemned, it's what you call the only democracy in the Middle East, that is Israel, between parentheses, that is doing what you have just reported, targeting civilians. And this has not just happened the last 48 hours.
Hamas was just targeting Palestinians, but you won't condemn that.
I'll tell you one thing. Hamas is not the Palestinian government, okay? The Israeli government is giving orders for its organized army. So please don't draw any symmetry here. Don't equate. There is no way you can draw any symmetry. And don't equate between the occupied and the occupier. This doesn't serve justice to understand for your audience and viewers the real situation. Since Israel's establishment, it has had one military doctrine. When it fights, it goes and fights civilians, kill civilians, so they pressure the fighters. Since 1948, and go back to the record, and this has been repeated in Gaza and will continue to be repeated. So the conversation is not a blame game. I am not in the business of blaming the victim here. The real conversation is how do we stop this vicious, deadly cycle?
You just condemned Israel for killing civilians, and you won't condemn Hamas for killing civilians.
How many times you have interviewed Israeli officials, Louise? Hundreds of times. How many times Israel have committed war crimes right live on your own cameras? Do you start by asking them to condemn themselves? Have you? You don't. No, I'll answer that question. You don't. You know why I refuse to answer this question? Because I refuse the premise of it. Because at the very heart of it is misrepresentation of the whole thing. Because it's the Palestinians that are always expected to condemn themselves. I mean, come on, this is a political conflict. We have been denied our rights for a long time. So this is the wrong starting point. The right starting point is to focus on the root causes, is to try and get out of this extreme dark tunnel, as opposed to this business by BBC and the mainstream media for 75 years. You bring us here whenever there are Israelis who are killed. Did you bring me here when many Palestinians in the West Bank, more than 200 over the last few months? Do you invite me when there is such Israeli provocations in Jerusalem and elsewhere? What Israelis have seen, which we started by saying tragic, the last 48 hours, the Palestinians see every day for the last 50 years. You know the situation in Gaza, you've just described it. This is the biggest open-air prison. Those people, 2 million, have been taken hostage by Israel for the last 16 years. So I'm saying this just to say, Louise, perhaps this is about time we abandon this rhetoric, very dangerous, this framework, and we start giving people the real ugly truth sometimes.
What is the solution in your eyes?
International law, that's it. The equal application of international resolutions and law and legitimacy, as you did in Ukraine. Would you bring the Ukrainian ambassador here and start asking him to condemn some of his fighters? We need to fully and equally apply the rules that were created by the League of Nations after the horrors of the Second World War. We need to make sure that Israel is not the exception. It has been for the last 75 years. We need to make sure that nobody is above the law. Britain is renowned, Louise, for the rule of law. I think that's the solution. Israel is an occupying force. It is responsible to provide protection for the people under its occupation. And should they commit crimes and crimes against humanity in the coming hours, and weeks. It must be held accountable by the international community and the international judicial system.
Hussam Domlop, thank you very much for coming on the program. Thank you.
أظن أن شف الغليل ياك حط الأمور، حط نقط على الحروف، وبين كيفاش الإعلام الغربي جالس كيضحك على الناس وكيبغي ديما يوهم الناس أن فلسطين هي الظالمة. بالعكس، الحلول موجودة والتاريخ موجود. وبرويطة يقول لك لكل أمان فينا زيوني مغربي، هذه حقيقة يشنط الجانك، ليست لعبة ولا أضحكة ولا مزحة. وبقاو تكذبوا على ريوسكم، بقاو توهموا الناس ناشي. هذا راه الحق راه باين. المهم اخوان اخوات، لا تبخلوا علينا باللايكات والبارطاجات. بغيت كاع العالم يعرف ويسمع بهذا السيد هذا اللي خصنا نأيدوه، حسام زملوط، اللي هو كيدافع بكل شراسه وجبنا يعني حط امامنا المعركه الاعلاميه ديال كيفاش كيبين للعالم ان الغرب كيبغيو يردونا حنا هما الظالمين وحنا مظلومين. وعاش خلي الاتحاد الاوروبي اللي كان قال لك بغى يحيد المساعدات شويه، سمعنا الاتفاقات غادي تلغى ديال الدول العربيه اللي هي مؤيده للاخوه الفلسطينيين والقضيه الفلسطينيه وما يتراجعوا. لا
تراجع الاتحاد الأوروبي عن قرار تعليق المساعدات للفلسطينيين ردا على الهجوم الذي شنته حركة حماس. وكان المفوض الأوروبي لشؤون التوسع والجوار قد أعلن مراجعة المساعدات التنموية للفلسطينيين البالغة نحو 730 مليون دولار، لكن العديد من الدول الأعضاء انتقدت تجاوز المفوضية لصلاحياتها وقالت أن قطع المساعدات سيضر بالمدنيين الفلسطينيين. ورفضت أيرلندا وإسبانيا والبرتغال واللوكسمبورغ القرار علنا، بينما عارضته دول أخرى في الكواليس.
لايكات وبارطاج، أحبكم في الله، نشوفكم العشية إن شاء الله.